Bienvenidos sean todos ustedes. Welcome everybody. We're going to have a very special show right now, early in the morning here in Mexico. But we have a very special reason to do it early here, because we're connecting all the way to the other side in the world, literally, because we are going to talk with the directors of a wonderful documentary that is bringing us the chance to talk about one of the greatest heroes that perhaps you might never heard about it. So let's start with the presentations, and we have one of the directors, the good Aaron. Is that you, Aaron? Yes.
Hello, I'm Aaron McCann.
Thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure to be talking with you. And we have also Dominic Pearce. Dominic, how are you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
He will be eventually appear on the screen. We have some some fun before the show where the cameras from Skype perhaps were not willing to cooperate. He's going to appear. There we are. Excellent.
Hello, Dom.
Hey. Hi.
Okay.
It looks like we're talking to each other.
All right, so there you have it. As you can see, the good spirit and the good humors that they have, it's actually some part of what you can see on the documentary that we're going to discuss next. And this is one of the words that it's kind of interesting. Perhaps you have heard about this, but it's focused on one of the biggest heroes that was on the main media, on television, on Japan. And it's the top-notch detective. And I'm really happy because I must confess that I was a huge fan of him, but nobody here in Mexico believed that he was like a huge star. So let's start first with you, Dom. Can you tell us a little bit how the idea to do a documentary about this very important figure came to your mind?
Oh, to specifically do a documentary about it. Look, it was a few things. The genesis of the show came from a conversation between Aaron and I. I just got back from a trip to Japan, and we kind of got into a back and forth about our favorite old Japanese samurai cult films, and we kind of started jamming on this idea of making this kind of V cinema 90s Japanese like samurai series. We wanted to do it as a full series. I mean, we ran with it. We really loved the idea, but the more we started working with it, we just didn't think we'd be able to ever actually pull off a full actual series at the time, especially we hadn't done anything of that scale yet. And so we kind of got chatting to the idea. We were really big at that time on kind of a lot of the true crime series, like the Jinx and other ones coming out on Netflix. And we'd also been big fans of both SBS cult movie show back in the day, which was like a community channel that played a lot of old international films. But also there was been a couple of big documentaries about the impact of different Japanese TV shows in Australia, in particular the Samurai, Shintaro the Samurai, being like a kind of a big cult, like historically a really important cult film and TV series here. So we kind of started meshing all those together, those ideas together. And that's kind of where Top Knot came about. We wanted to make a documentary about this show as a way to explore the world without necessarily having to make a full one. It went through so many different versions and ideas and kind of mutations, though, before we kind of arrived on the one that you've all seen.
On the very, very true story of Takashi Takamoto.
Exactly.
Very true story. Yeah.
Exactly. And for example, since you are in the big screen right now, Aaron, as I mentioned, I don't have a lot of control with the cameras, but that's cool.
That's totally fine.
But perhaps I believe that you, Aaron, are hacking my network, so you can be like, I want to talk also. So, Aaron, can you tell us about the mythical figure of the main actor, the main character, the director, the writer, the biggest star that it's the star, obviously, of this film?
Oh, Takashi Takamoto. Well,
Yes.
Takashi Takamoto he started as a pop star in the early '80s. He was pretty much writing his own little pop songs at the time. He was being picked up by a local network. Towards the end of the '80s, the network was called Sudofu, and they were looking for sort of a new head, a new representative to kind of to push their brand forward. And he was let's say not the best singer to come out of J-pop in the 80s, but he definitely was a singer to come out of J-pop in the 80s. and he kind of naturally gravitated towards the company, and they kind of formed this idea to make a long-running summer drama. In Japan, they're called summer dramas, and every year in the summer they would release a series of about 52 episodes, and they're usually what's called jadageki films, which is sort of a period drama. So he kind of got asked to write this show. And needless to say, things didn't go very well, but the show eventually found its way to Australia and became kind of a cult hit, which is sort of how everyone in the fan clubs around the world heard about it. And this is very much a documentary uncovering kind of the behind the scenes of what happened. How come it only lasted one season? How did it get so popular? And who was this man? Who was Takeshi Takamoto? And his life is very, very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. And for example, it's I find the pace. It's like something that keeps you on your heels all the time. On your heels. Well, it keeps you all the time like expecting what's coming next, because you have in the documentary film a revision of his history, and also we have a mix that I really like it, when we can understand part of the cultural impact that he had on the rest of the media. As you mentioned, he was participating perhaps for a different show, and we have part of the interactions that some of the main characters, not only the main character, has with the rest of the surroundings. And I'm going to show one of the scenes, and it's the cigarette promo. And how first, one question: in Australia, did you know that he was sponsoring this kind of products? Obviously, because there was some mention in the shows, you have some connections. But for example, the cigarette promos perhaps are not always released in the rest of the world. In Mexico, obviously, that didn't pass the censorship. So I'm going to play it. And can you tell us about the idea of how to include this kind of materials that I believe it was really difficult to obtain? Dominic, do you want to tell us a little bit?
Well, advertising, everything in Japan is intense, I guess, is probably the simplest way to say it. And in particular, like, their marketing advertising is also similarly intense. And whereas in the Western world, and I'm sure it's the same in Mexico, advertising for cigarettes has been restricted for quite some time. Mm-hmm. In Japan, it was a very huge and big budget affair for a very, very long time. And Takashi and Sudafu were no different, essentially.
Yeah, it wasn't until about 1996, 1997 that they didn't allow cigarette advertising on TV. They still have billboards. You can still like advertise via billboards for cigarettes throughout most of Asia, but the advertising of stuff on screen was pretty limited. So I mean, once we found like an old VHS, like you know, they get passed around quite a bit. We kind of came across it and decided like it's perfect. We really have to have it in our film, and it's sort of like, you know, it's an artifact of its time.
Takashi was also pretty direct in his product placement within the show. At all times, you never knew when one was going to show up.
Exactly. And for example, some of the other parts, I'm going to start touching about some of the points, like there's one video that you can find in the YouTube channel of Top Knock Detective, that it's the proof of concept, the teaser that was released, I believe in 2014, 2015. And can you tell us a little bit about that, Dominic, about how the idea came for the form, for the way that you are showing this story on the screen?
We just never really made anything like this thing that we were trying to make, and so the best way we were at the time, we were really inspired by some incredible proof of concept pieces that are out there. There was like a fantastic cult 70s version for like Daredevil, I believe, was one of the ones we were channeling at the time. Yeah. And there's that fantastic storyboard animatic for Halloween, is it? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And those were really fantastic at the time, but we just thought it's really hard to sell this concept currently, kind of verbally, telling people we want to make this documentary about this film, which is about a TV show, it's about all these different characters. So we just thought, let's explore the format. And so we just kind of went through all of our old famous samurai films and existing documentaries and kind of more contemporary stuff, and just like, okay, if we were making like a trailer for a documentary about all of this samurai stuff, what's the kind of content you would need, what are the highlight shots you would pull, what are the little bits. And so we just spent a good couple of weeks, I think, just backing and forthing on this edit and tooling and finding the music and digging up the stuff. And it was a lot of fun, and it laid a lot of the groundwork for what we ended up doing with the rest of the project.
And a lot of the style came from it as well, because there was many films that I had seen in Japan. There was many films that Dom had seen, but it was sort of like bringing them both together to sort of go, okay, yeah, this is the sort of show we can somehow make in Australia for next to nothing.
Yeah, and it was exciting. It was cool to kind of see it there and kind of being able to tell that story even just out of like random talking heads and random clips, and it just gave us an indication that maybe we could pull this off.
Excellent. Okay, let's pretend just for a second. We have been talking about the real story about one of the greatest heroes, and let's pretend for a second, that it's actually fiction, because people sometimes like to pretend that it's easier to believe all reality if it was a work of fiction. Let's not talk about the right now we live in a post-apocalyptic dystopia if you look at the news or something like that. So I'm going to show part of the trailer that you can find once again in the YouTube channel and also in the fan page. Let me just add the page in here so everybody knows what we're talking about. If you just search for Top Knot Detective in Facebook, don't worry, it's released. You will find all the information. There you are. Exactly. To the other, your other right there. There you are.
Yeah, we had it. Yeah.
Exactly. So you can find there all the information where to acquire the Blu-ray. If you are in the Americas, one recommendation, you can find it in Amazon. However, the version that it's being sold in for the United States and Mexico, it doesn't specify if it's for our regions, in case that you have a Blu-ray player that has a region control thing. However, if you go directly to Theater Windows Films, which is where I got my copy, you can get it, and it plays in here. I actually was checking some of the extras. There you are. Some of the extras last night. So let's pretend for a second that this is actually a mockumentary, not a documentary. So
we can pretend, sure. We can pretend.
Excellent. Just for the sake of argument.
I'm not sure what bit we're doing at this stage.
For funsies. Let's
exactly.
For funsies.
All right. So we have a. Sorry, I wasn't able to keep going with the reality.
Keep going all day.
Excellent. Well, for you it's easier to say because right now it's late not really so late, but it's night in there. But in Mexico we're starting the day, so I cannot keep it all day, so don't worry. Okay, so let's go first with you, Aaron, and we are looking in this case at some of the trailer. Can you tell us about some of the decisions about the visual style? Why to go, let's say, like so hard in some of the decisions? You include some of the tropes of the genre of the television and also of the films of the times, but you can present it perhaps with a modern sensibility, and you also do that, for example, with the interviews. But why why did you guys pick this particular style for showing the film? Pretty much like doing the 90s style for most of it. In the case of some of the scenes that we're doing, we go first with you, Aaron.
Yeah, so I think we very much treated it like an archaeological find. We very much set these rules for ourselves of like the show only exists on VHS that has been traded around. So you can really only find parts of the show because all the master tapes have been destroyed. So that was sort of our first outset. We always knew we would dump all the footage down to physical VHS and then take it from the VHS. We kind of broke 5 VCRs in the process. But it was always like an archaeological find. So, but we always knew we were going to intersperse that with real interviews with the actors or people who are playing the actors now, or actors who are made up slightly older because they looked a bit more de-aged back in the 80s footage. So we knew we would bounce back and forth as a mystery, but at the beginning we didn't really know there was going to be a murder mystery involved in it. Initially it was like an insurance scam to get the film to Australia, but then that's a whole other story. But that was sort of present within the proof of concept. But it evolved over time. I think it evolved over about a year or so that we kind of knew that it was going to be a true crime story that was looking back at at a show that never really existed. So the style, at least of the footage of the show within the show, was always going to be VHS and always 4:3 as well, because that's how I saw films.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Dominic, for example, part of the style that it comes, well, obviously you have to do the proper casting in this case, because it's not like, well, me and my friends can do pretty much any kind of parody. And we were mentioning before about some of the Fox 80s movies that have been kind of popular, especially for older people like my generation, because it reminds us of in this case, of our younger years. However, Dominic, can you tell us a little bit about the casting process for all the characters that we can find in this case for the interviews, of course, well, and also the rest of the movie?
Yeah, well, there's a handful of supporting cast. I guess like the triumvirate, the triptych, the main three are Takashi, Haruto, and Mia, played respectively by our good friends Toshi, Masa, and Mayu, and those three were like central to making the whole thing work. Yeah, in Western Australia, not a lot of Japanese casting options is something that Aaron and I discovered early on. We really wanted to tell this story and tell it as properly and as legitimately as we could. And so, yeah, we ended up looking overseas for a lot of our cast. Toshi, who plays Takashi, that sexy man right there, in particular, he's a fantastic story. So when we were initially casting, we were starting to work towards actually doing the series, we knew that once we'd done the pilot, we knew that if we ended up making the rest of it, we were going to ended up working very closely with the actor who would play Takashi. He was going to be central. He was going to be not only in the scenes, but we'd be shooting all of the photo shoots for all the promotional material and all of the documentary content, and there would be a lot of additional audio work. And just since so much of the story resolves around Takashi's character, we would need to have close access to him, and we'd need to really collaborate with him. So when we were initially casting, Masa, who plays Haruto, initially auditioned to play the role of Takashi, and we saw him, and with the casting videos came through, and I was talking to Aaron, and Aaron made a very good, and his video was fantastic. He flipped into shot, he quick drew a samurai sword, he just slashed through the air, he delivered the lines, it was incredible, it was like some legitimate samurai shit, it was fantastic. Aaron was like, it's too good though. Like, and it was a fantastic point. It was just like, he's so badass. Like, we're not going to believe this side of the character that's supposed to be kind of inept at doing these things. And so we were looking locally, and Toshi was an English teacher, essentially. He'd done some extra work in some other films, but nothing as a lead role or a central role. But when he auditioned, there was just this fantastic, when I talk about extra content.
Yeah, he had this nervous kind of quality because he knew he was kind of like going up for a bigger role, and maybe ordinarily he wouldn't be cast for it, but that nervousness was kind of like filled with this confidence that he could do it, and it was like, that is totally what Takashi is. He's kind of like this confidence man who believes he can do these things, and he just throws himself head on into it. So.
He had this energy to him on camera that just worked really well, and we thought, let's go with it. And funnily enough, a lot of the characters between Takashi and Haruto actually kind of came out of that scenario. We thought, well, that'd be pretty funny if there was a much more handsome, much more skilled, like actual samurai sword wielding actor on set as a main rival thing, and so that story about that relationship kind of came out of that, essentially. Let's just use Haruto for all the stunts and then use Toshi for all the acting scenes, and we just kind of ran with it. It was fantastic.
And for example, you mentioned in this case some of the stunts and some of the work that is being shown is really impressive. Obviously, as I mentioned before, you're using part of the tropes, the styles of the films and the shows of the time. However, can you tell us a little bit more about, for example, the fights, the choreographies that you were preparing in this case for the action scenes? Because they work wonderfully, especially when you consider that he was not only fighting ninjas, but also giant robots, for example, or octopus or people from space. So it's really funny. Can you tell us a little bit of the preparation of these kind of scenes? We go first with you, Dom, since you are on the screen, and then we go with Aaron.
Sure.
If I ever appear on screen, we'll see.
It's part of the fun of this.
Just keep the inside in the back. Yeah, no, it's good.
There you are.
As I said early on, we discovered Japanese casting options. Same thing kind of went for, in terms of people to help us with the sword fights and stunt coordinating. There's not a lot of people, a lot of experience to do that here. There are some great performers here in Perth, but no one has that experience of doing this particular kind of combat. And so when we started talking to Masa about coming on as a central role, he had already done a lot of fight coordination, stunt choreography and stuff for films that he worked on prior. And he also worked very closely with a gentleman named Sushi from Team Yas, who are a fantastic stunt team based here in Sydney. Melbourne. It is Melbourne. Yes. Oh, my bad. I'm terribly sorry. Melbourne. Sorry, Yas. So those guys came on board, and we were very lucky. I got to go over during pre-production and actually work with the team over there, with a whole other team of stunt guys that were actually working on the set of the film Hacksaw Ridge at the time, which is a World War II movie that Mel Gibson was directing. And they were sending us videos of the fight choreography being prepped kind of backstage on the back lot.
Yeah, so, sort of like at lunch they would practice, but they'd still be in their World War II uniforms. So we'd just get these phone videos with everyone in World War II uniforms doing this samurai sword crazy stunt. We're like, yes, this is going to look so much fun.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, though, for budgetary limitations, we couldn't bring all of those guys over to Perth to do it. We wanted to, and it would have been fantastic, but we made top knot with not a lot in the way of resources. So we kept some of the core team. They came over, and we had to train up another set of dudes here in Perth to kind of to do the actions. And it ended up being a mix of acrobats and stunt performers and martial artists, and it was fantastic. The whole team did an incredible job to bring it all together.
And a lot of also what sold it as well was like you couldn't shoot everything in Perth. Like there were certain things that we could double in Perth that looked like Japan, but we did still have to end up going to Japan for a majority of the shoot.
And for example, now that you mention it, in what places did you do the shooting? Can you tell us a little bit about the locations in this case? Which one?
Yes, so we went to Kyoto, Osaka, Tokyo, Nara. We did Ohama and
Ohara,
Ohara, yeah, and
Ohara, yeah.
And what was we did? Was there another one?
And there's a whole smattering of locations between those.
Yeah, we ended up doing 2 trips over the time because this started as a web series initially. And when we did the pilot, we went over for about 3 days. It was sort of like 5 days, but there was 3 days of like shooting. Yeah. And then when we went back the second time, almost a year later, when we completed the film, we spent like 7 days there or so, and we pretty much traveled around everywhere, just grabbing little pieces of things to sort of like sell it and make it look like we had found a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, we had a great little team of extras who ended up jumping in the van with us on the second trip, who ended up being everything from old people walking in the background of forests to ninja bodies to business types joining us out at clubs for everything, and just like just kind of rocking up at a restaurant unannounced, booking a table, telling them that we're going to be ordering a bunch of food, but actually taking a bunch of photos while we're back there, and then doing a bunch of stuff in character while we're actually eating dinner, and then moving on to the next location. So it was a weird kind of like actual trip, but shooting just whatever we could as we went.
How long did it take you to shoot the entire film? Obviously, it was divided in different places. In different times because of the locations that you were needing to shoot. But if you could like put it together, like how many months did it took you guys to shoot the entire film?
I think I did the math on it once, and it was like 41-ish days, but it was split over 3 years.
Yeah.
So there was kind of like there was a chunk that we did, and then we did a small chunk in Japan, and then we came back, and then we shot little bits in our backyard of like heads exploding and stuff. Yeah. And then we picked up and did the rest of the series, which we then went to Japan for a few days, then back to Perth, and we traveled all around Perth. Then we had a small stint in Sydney for the interviews. Yeah. So we had to fly from the West Coast to the East Coast for like 2-3 days of interviews. Then we came back and edited the whole film, but then we we picked up like another scene that we made up. The post-end credit sequence was another little day, which is for like an Italian Gileo film, also a true film, true story.
Of course.
And yeah, so all up, I think when you really piece it together, it was like 40-something days, but a lot of it was by ourselves, really. There was a lot of those days where like it was 3 people on the crew or 4 people on the crew, and we just sort of went around and made it happen.
Yeah, Aaron, myself, generally our cinematographer AJ, and whoever we were subjecting to horrible things that particular day.
And another question that, in this case, and sorry if I ask perhaps this sort of behind the scenes questions, because in here in Mexico, the way of that the local industry works is kind of funny. So, for example, we depend, not we, but a lot of filmmakers depends completely on support, economical support from the government for the different institutions. However, they look more like it's like if it was the only way that you can make a film in Mexico, which it is not. In the case of your film, it was completely self-financed, or did you have any sort of support, or you cannot talk about it, and I have to move to a different topic?
No, we can talk about it. So it began as a pilot for one of the TV stations over here called SBS. They put up a small kind of competition prize, which allowed, I think it was like, what was it, 10 or 20,000 or something like that? For the first. Anyway,
a bunch of different crews made a bunch of pilots, and I think we got shortlisted with 10 crews. Yeah. I think, yeah.
So then basically we got a small chunk of money to do that, and that's what became the entire first episode. It's also the pilot, which is on the Blu-ray. It's the first little part of the film where we kind of did the most amount of sort of travel and backstory. Then we went back to SBS, and they sort of gave us a little bit of money and to make the second part, and we had to sort of go to Screen Australia, who is our national funding body, where they're a government institute, and then Screen West in Western Australia are a federal kind of level funding body. And then there was some little bits and pieces that kind of came from everywhere, but it is always that way with sort of small independent films. You kind of grab little pieces from everywhere to sort of make up the budget. And over the time, we made it for as little as we could, because that was pretty much all we could get for a crazy idea that no one really knew how it was going to come together.
And
I think
go on.
I think it was one of the first times that one of the network, or SBS at least, SBS Comedy worked together with government funding bodies to fund a pilot for a piece of original content, which would go on to be SBS's kind of first and only original film that they've made. Yeah.
They'll never do it again.
Never again. We broke them. We ruined it. But the first of its kind. We are very fortunate to have access to some great arts funding for doing films here in Australia, because obviously the market industry isn't as big locally as it is compared to some of the other parts of the world. And so for filmmakers starting out there, it's a pretty important thing.
I see. And for example, let's move to a different part of the film. I'm going to show some of the screens where you actually sort of take the evolution of the story, and how perhaps in this case the main character or top-notch detective of the top-notch detective show was being replaced by some sort of different characters. And once again, this comes from the fan page in Facebook, and we have some of the other variations of the characters. How did the idea for these characters that are being included came to your mind? Dominic, Aaron?
Time Strike was all you, Dom.
Well, yeah, like when we were doing the first script of the feature, I don't know, the first version of the feature script was also the what was originally the web series scripts, but we had a giant whiteboard of just things that we thought would be fantastic places for the show to go, and one of them was an idea I pitched was the Time Striker, which was essentially a kind of Doctor Who play on a Power Ranger, or the classic archetype
exactly.
Sentai, but his gimmick being time travel. And yes, I am aware that there were a team of Power Rangers that travel through time. This is different, and we did it first. So fuck off. But it was this is crazy. Like as with many things in this film, it was just a stupid suggestion joke between the two of us that after we spent a long time backing and forthing on, just kind of gained a life of its own. And we had a lot of fun with the Time Striker. He allowed us to kind of he allowed us to wander into other avenues of crazy Japanese cult TV that wasn't just samurai-based stuff, essentially.
But it was also like, I think it was like a year later or so, we were looking back on like a TV show that originally inspired Top Knot Detective was called Aberembo Shogun, and it's got about 800 and something episodes in Japan. And we found out after we had made the film, there was a TV crossover with Aberembo Shogun and Kamen Rider, which is Kamen Rider is like another big famous sort of Japanese sort of Sentai thing, and it's pretty much the storyline of Time Striker when they have the crossover episode.
Yeah.
So it was like
we'd see the imagery before of this guy, like this old samurai dude like riding alongside a fucking Super Sentai guy. We just kind of we wanted to run with that. We have to have the cameo episode. We just didn't expect it to become such a central character.
Right, and for example, after the film was made and done, and you started sending it to the different festivals. For example, there are some film festivals that are that have the recognition for a particular genre in this case, and it was really nice. For example, you can see that it was being shown in last year in Sitges, and it was in Fantastic Fest and Fright Fest, International Film Festival of Rotterdam, which for me is kind of interesting because Rotterdam, for me, it's more like slow-pacing films with low budget that are like, or at least the Mexican films that are usually in the Rotterdam Film Festival selection are like films where not much is happening in there. However,
there's not that many genre films there. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So how did you guys feel about the reception that got the film after it was released and it was being picked by the different film festivals?
It's been fantastic, I guess. Like, get the shorthand. We've been pretty blown away by the festival response, the international response to the film, and the festivals that it has gotten to play. Sitges Sitges last year was really huge. Fantastic Fest, being the first American premiere of the film, was great. Like the perfect home for that film. Like the kind of audiences that we're trying to reach with it. Fright Fest, same. It's been great. I guess the people at those festivals really see in it the love of cult cinema that we have, and I guess relate and can latch onto the kind of things we're trying to celebrate and the way we're trying to explore that world and the lens we're applying to it. But yeah, I think I can safely say that neither Aaron and I expected the film to have the festival life that it has.
Yeah, I mean, even to be still kind of like talking about it today, and it's crazy. It feels like about 3 years ago that we finished making this film. I'm just a distant voice that's talking through Dom's mouth. By the way.
Perhaps we could keep like the spirit of the Japanese version when they are being dubbed to a different language, and Dom has to move his mouth while Aaron is talking. Like,
yeah, Dom, you just move your mouth while I'm talking. There we go. So perfect.
There you are.
Look, I'm back now.
All right. So first, I want to thank some of the people that are in the live streaming in Facebook. Saludos a Chacho, Fernando, and Frankie. They are all leaving comments that actually Frankie, this is a movie that I was telling you about like 3 or 4 weeks ago. So that now you have more reasons to watch it. And also in Periscope we have some comments in there, and actually you can read it down there, but they are not like so relevant to this. So we're pretty much getting to the end of this film. However, this is a documentary.
This is also a film.
It has been a journey.
Exactly, and one of us is going to get killed, and you have to resolve the true crime story that has been plotted. No, that's a different thing.
It's been our dream all along to do a podcast and figure out like who's murdering who in a three-way video conversation.
Exactly, and it will be kind of actually I am in an advantage because pretty much every animal and insect species in Australia is that dangerous.
Every single one. The drop bear is still the most venomous creature that we have.
Yeah, snakes and reptiles is one thing, but drop bears will fucking kill you. Those things are crazy. Yeah.
So
We
if you
don't go into the bush much though. Like for all of Australia's deadly flora and fauna, it's not really a regular issue for us. We just kind of avoid that whole
I
jam.
barely leave my house.
there you are. So there you have it. If I mysteriously disappear and you find some traces of this kind of species or something, you can really easily track to the responsibles at my left in the screen. Nah. Okay, so before we finish the streaming, the conversation, I want you to tell us perhaps about some of the main influences that you have for the film. You have already mentioned part of because you have a lot of influences, but for example, the one that struck you the most, the one that was most important for you to develop this project, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like we were basing on this kind of films, this kind of shows, but perhaps a director or an actor. So Dominic, let's go with you first. What were one or some of your influences for the style and the way that you did this film?
For doing this film,
This particular film.
this particular film. God, who am I channel?
Like Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
Yeah, there's like just a whole myriad, the whole age of films, and just like so many random. Look, it's inspired by a lot of foreign films that I couldn't actually necessarily tell you who made them. I saw them when I was young, so I'm not super familiar with those particular actors. Yeah, the work of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place is a huge influence on the series. And oh God, what else?
But also like the work of Shintaro Katsu as well, who did his real story is fascinating. So that's sort of inspired a lot of Takashi.
That's very much a dominant influence, like Hunter the Razor and the Lone Wolf and Cub films, and just that his work and that era of stuff, and also the real story behind him. I think that's like a massive influence. Like, I mean, look, we're channeling a fair bit of Takashi Miike in bits where we can with the ultra violence and beat Takashi really makes himself felt throughout the film as well. Man, there's just so many.
Also, I guess like one of the influences when we were doing it was the HBO series The Jinx.
Mm-hmm.
So we had seen
The Jinx. I mentioned that earlier.
And, so like that was even the style of it and Making a Murderer was sort of coming out at the same time that we were writing. So it was kind of like, what if we did a Making a Murderer version of The Samurai, which was a big series in Australia throughout the 70s and 80s.
Well, yeah, we knew we wanted to make the Samurai show, but kind of like what you were saying to us earlier, Apollo, about the just leaning into the comedy and the jokes of making fun of that era. We really wanted to try and do something that would just take people in a slightly different direction, like set them up for that, but kind of explore that world in a bit different way. Yeah, The Jinx. I think casting John Bonet at the same.
Casting John Bonet came out after, but Forgotten Silver,
Forgotten Silver, obviously Peter Jackson's work. Yeah, Forgotten Silver, with a huge influence. Obviously, similar territory to what we're doing, but kind of looking at filmmaking itself, but same way, exploring a content, something that isn't entirely real, selling it in a very real way. And like when he did it a few years before us, and he got in a lot of trouble in New Zealand. They were super pissed off when they found out that stuff wasn't real. Writing angry letters to the paper.
This is before the internet, where you could write angry letters every day.
Yeah, now we just get furious comments from people we don't know telling us,
but on Twitter, random rants.
Yeah.
All right. So we're pretty much about to finish this interview, and before we go, Aaron, can you tell us a little bit where people can find more about this film? Well, I already mentioned, but there are some easy ways to find you in social networks, right?
Yeah, so if you search for Top Knot Detective on Facebook, that's pretty much our main page. It's TK Detective on Twitter. We've got Top Knot Detective on YouTube. And if you're looking to try and buy the film and you're in the UK or want to buy a physical copy, you can get it through Arrow and Third Window Films. And if you're looking to get it digitally, Amazon Prime, if it's available, hopefully we can get it to Mexico soon.
Mm-hmm. So there you have it. So you have no excuses. You can find it in the regular and perhaps not so regular channels. And I mean this in the case of Amazon, because while they have we actually have access to the Amazon Prime options here in Mexico, we don't have the access to the rent of particular films because, well, rights management. So, but that's not an excuse. I mentioned that I actually got my copy in there. You can get yours too. And one recommendation, in case that you are ordering the Blu-ray from Mexico or Latin American countries, you better pay for the tracked option, and you get it like in 2 days, in 3 days the most. So you get it really fast, and believe me, it's a joy to be watching this film. You will have a wonderful time while you are actually exploring perhaps some of the darkest places in the mind of the criminal. So there you have it, a nice balance in this case. And in case that you want to contact directly and thank the directors, you can reach Aaron if you look for him on Twitter. Don't worry, in the webpage where this show is located, in Churros y Palomitas, you have the direct link, so you don't have to misspell his name as I did when I was writing it down. So you can find him in Twitter.
Damn.
And
be on my Twitter now.
Exactly. And of course, you can find the God Boy, Dominic Pearce, in there. Also on
really
Twitter.
need to decorate that Twitter.
Yeah, you haven't got no top banner in that.
I rarely use. I really need to. I'm gonna do more with it. It's gonna be great. I'm gonna have a great, very tasteful banner. It's going to be very descriptive of my personality and my creative interests. It's going to be great.
Well, the grayish bluish strip is kind of stylish, so don't worry, it looks nice.
It's minimal.
Retro.
Retro. Muted tones. That photo is good fun, though. That's fantastic. It's a zombie walk from my friend John McPhail's film. That's a good time.
There you are. It. So, thanks to all who are watching this show. Thank you for waking up early, Frankie, Fernando, and Chacho, and the rest of the people who are joining us. Don't worry, you will be having the video version. It's already been recorded, so you can find it in Periscope, in Facebook, and YouTube, and also in a different channel that it's secret, and you have to pay for it. Don't worry. And also, the audio version, the podcast downloadable version, will be available, I believe, that in a couple of hours. And before I go, I want to thank you very much, Aaron and Dominic, because it was a real pleasure to talk with you. I really loved your film. I mentioned that before, and thank you for being so kind to share your time and your experience with all of us.
Thank you so much.
For having us.
No,
Pleasure,
it's
man.
great chatting.
All right, and I was just waiting for so we can have the screen split with the three of us. But as you have seen on the rest of the show, it has a control of its own. So don't worry.
Dom's gone now.
Exactly.
Wait, I'll try.
Dom is in a better place.
Me back?
I'll do your voice, Dom. It's fine. Ah.
No, it's good. It's good. Same timbre.
All right. So thank you very much, guys, and we will be seeing each other in a different show, and hopefully we will be seeing Dominic and Aaron in a future transmission, perhaps when we can talk about, I don't know, Japanese culture, or just for the pleasure of talking about films, something like that.
Indeed, we'd love to chat again.
All right, thank you guys, and thanks to all the people who are watching. Muchas gracias a todos, and we will see. Oh, there you are. Okay.
There you are, Dom. There you are. Look, quickly.
I'm back.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, and let's roll the end credits. And I'm going to go to the private line to say goodbye to our guys.
Bye.
Okay.